Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's June 24, 2022, and this is episode 781. Following on from last week, today we pick up the trail on my recent complete Namibia tour on the second afternoon in Colemanskop, the deserted diamond mine town. We have historically been able to do an afternoon followed by a morning, which helps to get different directions of the sunlight on both days. But they've stopped doing an afternoon visit into Elizabeth Bay, so we worked with what we had. It was still great, and most of the opportunities are still available to us. I started with the ice factory, but I've shown so many images of that in the past, I think we'll skip it for today. I continued by walking up the hill behind the visitors centre where we'd eaten lunch and shot this next image in the fifth building from the end of the row. Still in relatively good condition, but also with some sand at the foot of the stairs. I liked this composition with the one-point perspective and a certain amount of symmetry, but also the asymmetry with the stairs on the left coming up closer. My wife's immediate reaction was, "And you, of course, walked up those stairs to get that photo," probably thinking that I should have gone through them. I must admit I was slightly nervous, especially as some of the steps gave out an unhealthy groan as I stood on them, but it all worked out okay. Also, for those of you that are wondering why I allowed the windows to blow out that way, the reason is that I actually quite like the mystique of not being able to see outside. If I was trying to sell this house working to architecture photographers' rules, I'd do an HDR, but as art, I prefer this style of image. The only time you'll see anything outside a window in my shots here is when the natural light or a little bit of tweaking in Capture One Pro enables me to show it. Otherwise, it's white windows all the way. The next image is an example of when we do see outside. The large expanse of missing roof in the accountant's house makes it easy to expose for both inside and outside. So we see the blue sky and the Namib desert running across the horizon, as well as the room at the back of the attic and the beams that we can still walk on to get around up here. I don't recall why, but I'd let my ISO creep up to 500 for these shots. So my shutter speed was unnecessarily high at 1/320th of a second at f11 for this shot. It's not an issue with today's cameras, but I'm slightly disappointed in myself here because I'm usually more careful with my exposure. The results balance, of course, but not being able to remember why I used these settings is a little bit annoying. I guess I'm not getting any younger though, so you'll have to forgive me for not being able to keep up with myself from time to time. Here's another relatively famous shot from Colemanskop, with the sand-filled room and the bathtub. I included the door to the room open yet stuck in the sand because I find these jarred open doors really appealing. I don't know where the bathtub was originally fixed, but it seems to be almost surfing the sand now, and the broken tree branch looks almost like a piece of driftwood afloat on the same sea of sand. And here is a final shot from Colemanskop for this series, and we see again the door stuck in the sand, this time through a first door with a second door in the background. We also see here how the afternoon light was causing a bit of a problem with the highlights on the sand, but I do like the contrast between the light and dark, so again I'm not too worried about this. I was at least back on form with my camera settings by this point, with the ISO set to 100 for a 0.4 second exposure at f11. All of these shots were made with the Canon RF 15-35mm f2.8L lens. Having bought this lens a couple of years ago to replace my EF 11-24mm lens when I switched to mirrorless, I hadn't really given the RF lens much love until now. But love it I do, now that I've had a chance to really work with it. It's an amazing lens, and although I thought I'd miss the extra 4mm on the wide end, I really didn't. So at this point, I'm really happy with the decision to switch these lenses out. The extra aperture stop was also very welcome for the astrophotography that we do on this trip, so all in all, a good decision. We spend one more night in Luderitz, the city near Kolmanskop on the Atlantic coast of Namibia. Then started our drive inland, then north to Sossusvlei, where we would spend 3 nights. We start to see a little more wildlife on that drive, and at one point came across a matriarchal ostrich looking after 13 young ostrich. The matriarch generally looks after all the young in their herd, with help from other females who may have contributed to the clutch. You can actually only see 11 of the 13 chicks in this shot, as the other 2 were a little too far away from the group for an effective shot. I cropped this down to a panorama, partly to emphasize the width of the group of young ostrich, but also because we were shooting over the top of a fence, so the birds were naturally placed quite low in the frame, and the top of the frame added no real interest, so I got rid of it. We saw multiple birds on the way as well, and I was able to get this shot as what I believe to be a greater kestrel landed on the top of the fence at the side of the road. It's not the best shot, but I like the warmth of the scene and the dynamic pose of the kestrel. Pretty much in the same colour palette, here we see an oryx feeding in the long grass, and it was so nice to see all that grass during this drive. Namibia has just come out of a 7-year drought that has cost the lives of many farm animals as the farmers fought to find food and water for them. Some farmers paid out what money they had for food, only to go on to lose the cattle anyway, as the drought worsened. So seeing the oryx standing in these huge open grass-covered plains was really reassuring. We entered the Namib-Naukluft National Park with about an hour to spare, so we drove down into the valley to the first dry riverbed, seeing a number of oryx and springbok on the way. Just oryx shots aren't much to write home about, but I do like it when we are able to get them in a nice environment, like this one with the sand dunes in the background and the warm light just before sundown bathing them all. I shot this with the 100-500mm lens and the 1.4x extender for a focal length of 700mm. I'd set my camera up to be able to capture movement should it be required, so my ISO was at 1600 and my shutter speed a 1,000th of a second at f11. The following morning, up bright and early, we drove down to the car park near Deadflay and walked into the iconic valley. There are now 2 new sand dunes that have formed in the mouth of the valley, so the walk gets the heart beating a little more than before, as do the additional corona pounds that I need to lose. But this spot is so worth the effort. After my 3-year hiatus from Namibia, it almost felt natural to go back to the first 2 trees that I shot here on my first visit in 2013. For anyone that doesn't get what's happening here, there is a minute each morning when the sun has risen to the point where it's illuminating the sand dune that you see in the top 4/5 of this photo, but there's a sand dune to our backs which casts a shadow across the clay basin. throwing the basin and the petrified camelthorn trees into shadow. That contrast makes the trees go almost black, and the almost white clay remains a mid to dark grey colour. This location was thrust into the limelight by National Geographic photographer Frans Lanting, and although I wasn't aware of Lanting's beautiful work on my first visit, I was kind of proud to find that the left two trees in my photo feature prominently on the right side of his iconic image. This final image for this episode was shot at the end of the same day, when we walked to one of the dunes with some trees at its base. This is one of my favourites because of the trees, and the way the left side of the dune goes into shadow as the sun nears the horizon. It also made a nice change to see a bit of cloud in the sky here, as we don't see that too often. I cropped this to a 16:9 aspect ratio to work better with the wide screen, as the additional bit of sky I had in my original was really not adding anything. We'll pick up the trail on the second morning in Dead Flay in a few days, as I'm trying to pull in our 3 June episodes before the end of the month. So let's catch up again in a few days. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting us on Patreon, which comes with a variety of tiers and benefits depending on your contribution. Although all tiers provide access to the full blog posts for more than 780 episodes, as well as access to the MVP community. For further details, check out our Patreon page at mbp.ac/Patreon. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll catch you again in a few days, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.